Hi everyone, I'm Dale Smith, aka Journo Dale, and we're here to talk about Canadian politics. Today I wanted to talk about the Senate, and not Mark Carney's recent appointments because I have a whole lot to write about that in columns that are coming up, so watch for that. But rather this invented grievance that Alberta has been, or certain Albertans have been voicing lately, about how they are underrepresented in the Senate, and that therefore that's one of their grievances that they're angry about, and that's going to be part of their referendum, and so on and so on. But nobody has actually understood how Senate composition works, and that's kind of a problem. The notion that Alberta is underrepresented in the Senate implies that the Senate is a rep by pop chamber, meaning, of course, representation by population, which it is not. The House of Commons is a representation by population chamber. The Senate is a representation by region chamber. And a lot of people have a really hard time wrapping their head around what that means. But essentially, since its creation, the Senate has been organized in regional blocks. 24 seats for the Maritimes, 24 seats for Quebec, 24 seats for Ontario, and as provinces west of Ontario were added to Confederation, it became 24 seats for the West. And the provincial breakdown in there is, of course, 6 each for the for the Western provinces, 10 each Nova Scotia and New Brunswick, and 4 PEI, and that again equals 24 for each region. And then each territory also has 1 seat, and Newfoundland, who was a latecomer to Confederation, ended up getting 6, which puts it roughly on par with, for example, the Western provinces. But again, the whole math behind it was regional blocks, not provincial ones. And there's a reason for that, which has a lot to do with the Senate being a chamber that was devoted toward minority representation, included not just linguistic and religious minorities, because that was a very big consideration back in 1867. That is, in fact, one of the reasons why Quebec is the only Senate region that has essential districts within its Senate makeup, is because it was about protecting, for example, Anglophone minorities and Protestant minorities within the province. Based on the demographic makeup at the time, back when it was a predominantly Francophone and Catholic province, and the Catholic Church had a lot of political influence there as well. So again, it was about regional representation, and the fact that the Maritime provinces wanted to have some kind of a counterbalance to otherwise just being swamped under all the seats in Ontario in the House of Commons. And so that was one of the reasons why this regional block makeup was devised, was so that the Maritime provinces would have at least a little bit more counterbalance, because there was no way they were ever going to compete in terms of population with Ontario and or Quebec. And Quebec's population has since reduced in, proportionally speaking, compared to, for example, Ontario. But again, it was about ensuring that you had a protected number of seats, which could help counterbalance some of what happens in the House of Commons. And that's again why they had an equal number in the block, the regional block, than Ontario and Quebec as regional blocks in and of themselves. So with this in mind, the notion that Alberta is underrepresented would require that we would have to rethink the regional blocks within the Senate, and that's easier said than done. For a long time, Alberta liked to champion the so-called Triple E Senate, being equal, effective, and elected. And there are problems with all of those when it comes to what kind of chamber we want the Senate to be. If it becomes an elected body, then it becomes a competition to the House of Commons, and because there are fewer seats within the Senate than there are in the House of Commons, and because senators ostensibly represent the whole province and not just a part within it, there would be a lot of throwing their weight around in terms of, you only represent 100,000 people, I represent the entire province of Ontario, I have more democratic weight than you do, blah blah blah. So there's that consideration, but also we had a partially elected upper chamber pre-Confederation. And it was considered a triple R Senate at the time, being rich, rural, and regressive. And one of the reasons why they decided not to make it an unelected chamber in 1867 was because the costs of running, as it was then called, Legislative Council elections were becoming extremely prohibitive because of the amount of territory that it covered as compared to a riding within the House of Commons. And so therefore that was one of the considerations. In terms of equal, that's again another real problem, because why would we give PEI the same number of Senate seats that we give Ontario? That doesn't make any particular sense. Especially if you're thinking of an American-esque 2 seats per, or 5 seats per, or 10 seats per. Again, there's no real sense to the logic there why, again, PEI would deserve the same number of seats as Ontario or Quebec or Alberta, for that matter. And so I don't quite understand the thinking in there, other than that they are simply trying to ape the American system, which has its own particular problems, not the least of which is the fact that American senators spend 2/3 of their time fundraising for their re-election, as opposed to doing the actual legislative work that they're supposed to be doing. So again, when we talk about this notion that Alberta is underrepresented in the Senate, I think we need to step back and realize the reason why the distribution blocks are the way they are, and start having to have a conversation around that. Do we think that the West should be broken up into Alberta, BC, each getting 12 seats to form a block of 24, and Saskatchewan, Manitoba also getting 12 seats each? Again, is the logic there sound? I'm not sure. There was a sort of almost population equilibrium between the 4 regions, in terms of, if you kind of added up the population of Ontario and Quebec, they would have been roughly proportionate at one point in time, less so now. The Maritimes as a whole, again, a little less, but the combined total population would have been a little more roughly analogous. Same again for the West. This is of course changed with the growth in both Alberta and Vancouver in particular, when it comes to British Columbia. But again, the point of the chamber, though, is not to be represented by population, but regional, so you have a broader perspective. And that was, again, one of the whole reasons why the Senate is constructed the way it is because it's trying to take a broader perspective in terms of not just the concerns of a single constituency or so on, but to try and have a broader perspective for either your province or your region as a whole, when it comes to how the distribution's allocated. So again, these are things that we should be thinking about. I don't know that this is necessarily a legitimate grievance, and Danielle Smith has since decided that one of her referendum questions is on Senate abolition, which again doesn't help anyone, doesn't make any sense. It just creates more problems because you have less oversight for government if you no longer have a Senate, and you create a lot more work for MPs who should be doing oversight work and aren't necessarily because they're too busy politicking. And New Zealand abolished their upper chamber and have since come to regret it because, oh yeah, they did a lot of oversight work that isn't getting done now, and that's kind of a problem in a parliamentary system. So yeah, I think Danielle Smith is just trying to, she's trying to stoke trouble. Stir up drama, that kind of thing. There's no actual sense in any of what she's proposing in terms of her referendum questions, not the least of which is the separation or referendum on a referendum separate, but that whole thing aside. But again, as a grievance that Alberta is somehow underrepresented in the Senate, I don't think holds when you look at the actual logic of the Senate in and of itself. And whenever someone comes up with this argument, and it has been coming up, particularly in places like the National Post, no, that's not how the Senate works. It's not how it ever worked, and we should actually, have a modicum of civic literacy and remind people that 24, 24, 24, 24 is the reason why it exists the way it does. And that's everything for this week. Join us again next week for some more Canadian politics. I'm Dale Smith. It's at journo_Dale on Twitter and journodale_no_ on Bluesky. And don't forget to like the video, share, subscribe, and support us on Patreon. Thanks, everyone.